On a freezing Christmas Eve, as snow blanketed the world in silence, a wealthy man walked alone, his heart heavier than the cold night air. Then, out of the shadows, he heard a trembling little voice whispering, "Please don't hurt us!" In that moment, his life was about to change forever. What he found in the snow was not just two children abandoned to the darkness, but a truth that tied him to a past love and a future he never imagined. This is not just a story of wealth or loneliness, it is a story of second chances, of finding family where you least expect it, and of how love can thaw even the coldest of winters. If you believe in healing, redemption, and the power of love to rewrite broken stories, stay with us. Subscribe now to Loss and Healing, and let your heart be part of this journey. The wind carried the bite of winter, wrapping the city of Madison in a cloak of frost and silence. It was Christmas Eve, and the streets pulsed with lights, music, and the sound of families huddled close together. Yet, amid the glow of the season, one man walked alone. Caleb Whitmore's footsteps crunched on the frozen path beside Lake Mendota, each step echoing against the emptiness he carried within. He wore a tailored navy coat, polished shoes now dusted with snow, and an expression that betrayed nothing of the storm quietly gathering in his chest. His phone buzzed once, then again, lighting up with cheerful greetings. Merry Christmas from his CFO, season's blessings from a senator, gratitude from business partners who owed him their success. He scrolled through them with numb indifference. Not a single message reaching beyond the walls of formality. Not one name on the screen belonged to someone who truly knew him, who could see beyond the surface of power and wealth to the man who had long forgotten what it felt like to be known. He had left his company's holiday gala earlier that evening, slipping away from champagne towers and the hum of jazz as easily as a ghost leaving a crowded room. The laughter and music had felt like a language he no longer understood. Behind him, he had left a ballroom full of acquaintances. Ahead of him, only silence and the icy breath of winter. His collar was turned high against the wind, yet it did little to shield him from the loneliness that clung more tightly than the cold. As he walked, he noticed the way the snow settled in spirals, falling softly, almost reverently, as if the world itself was trying to hush its own noise. He thought of Christmases past, when the holiday had meant something more than obligations and appearances. Those memories felt like artifacts now, buried beneath years of deals, acquisitions, and the steady climb to the top of a ladder that had brought him nothing but solitude. The wooden bench by the lake emerged through the blur of snow. At first glance, it seemed deserted, just another relic of summer now forgotten in the harshness of winter. But then, something shifted. A bundle, small and trembling, moved ever so slightly. Caleb slowed his steps. What he had mistaken for discarded clothing was not lifeless at all. He drew closer, and his breath caught. Curled tightly into herself was a little girl, no older than 7, her thin arms wrapped protectively around a shape hidden beneath a faded pink blanket. Her hair was tangled and damp from snowflakes that refused to melt, her sneakers soaked through, her coat no match for the cruel night. But it was not her fragile form that stopped him cold, it was her eyes. Wide, too old for her age, carrying a blankness that should never belong to a child. And then came the voice, fragile, cracked, yet sharp enough to slice through the night. "Please, do not take us back!" Caleb froze where he stood, the weight of those words anchoring him to the ground. The girl's arms tightened around the bundle. She whispered again, "She hurts us." The world seemed to tilt, the snow still falling but now distant, muffled by the pounding of his heart. Slowly, carefully, he stepped closer, lowering himself to the ground as though approaching a wounded animal.
Oh my gosh.
"Are you alone out here?" he asked, his voice gentler than he remembered it could be. The girl hesitated. Her eyes darted toward the trees, as though expecting punishment to emerge from the shadows. At last, she shifted slightly, revealing the secret she held so tightly. A baby, barely 10 months old. Her cheeks blotched from cold, her tiny body frighteningly still, a few tufts of dark hair matted against her skin. Around her delicate neck, bruises in stark, unforgiving contrast to the pale of her skin. Caleb's chest tightened, a rush of heat surging beneath the layers of his expensive clothing. Without thinking, he knelt in the snow, the icy damp seeping through his trousers forgotten. His hand reached forward but stopped short, hovering as if his touch might break what little strength these children had left. "Can I see her?" he asked softly. The girl's eyes flickered with fear, Then, with a small nod, she loosened the blanket just enough for him to glimpse the baby's face. A whimper escaped the child, not a cry, just a broken sound, fragile as glass. "What is your name?" Caleb asked. "Emily," she whispered. "And your sister?" "Luna." Snowflakes gathered on Emily's lashes, melting into tears she refused to shed. Caleb's throat constricted. Something within him cracked, a fracture spreading through the armor he had worn for years. The businessman in him screamed of risk, of complications, of liabilities. But another voice, older, buried deep, rose louder than reason. "You cannot stay out here," he said. "You are coming with me." Emily's arms tightened around her sister. "Are you going to take us back?" "No," Caleb answered, the word leaving his mouth with more certainty than he had expected. "I am taking you somewhere safe." In one swift motion, he shrugged off his coat and wrapped it around both children. The sting of the winter air bit instantly at his chest, but he ignored it. Gently, he lifted Emily, who clutched Luna with the desperation of someone who had already lost too much. They were impossibly light in his arms, a weight that somehow carried the force of an entire world. As he carried them across the snow, toward the safety of his waiting car, Caleb felt the crack within him widen. For years, he had been a man who measured life in profit margins and architectural blueprints. Tonight, with a child's plea echoing in his ears, he was beginning to measure it differently. Each step toward the car was a step away from the man he had been, and toward someone he did not yet know how to become. And though he did not yet understand it fully, he was carrying far more than two children through the snow. He was carrying the fragile, flickering chance at redemption. The engine of the black Escalade hummed low against the stillness of the night. Snow clung to the tires, the heat inside fighting back the bitter cold that pressed against the windows. Caleb sat behind the wheel, but his mind was not on the road. His gaze kept flicking to the rearview mirror, where two small lives sat wrapped in his coat, fragile and shivering. Emily held Luna tightly, her thin arms trembling, though not from the cold alone. It was the kind of trembling that comes from fear that has taken root too deep. When he adjusted the mirror slightly, their eyes met. Hers were wide, guarded, carrying the kind of weight that no child should ever know. For a second, he thought she might look away, but she did not. She held his gaze like someone testing the strength of a rope before daring to climb. His chest ached. He wanted to say something reassuring, something that might cut through the silence, but the words felt foreign. Comfort was not a language he had spoken in a very long time. The city lights blurred as he drove. The skyscrapers he had once designed, monuments to his ambition, rose against the night sky. He had built these towers with steel and glass, but in that moment they seemed hollow, lifeless, compared to the quiet breaths of the two children in the back seat. Every turn of the wheel seemed to carry him further from the man who had stood proudly at ribbon cuttings and closer to someone he barely recognized. At last, he pulled into the parking lot of a small 24-hour diner, its neon sign buzzing faintly against the falling snow. He killed the engine and turned back. "Come on," he said gently. Emily's grip on Luna tightened. "They will not hurt her here," he added quickly, reading the fear on her face. "I promise." She hesitated, then allowed him to help them out of the car. He carried them both through the door, the bell above it chiming softly, announcing an arrival that felt heavier than the moment suggested. Inside, the diner glowed with a worn warmth. The scent of coffee and fried potatoes lingered in the air, mingling with the faint sound of Bing Crosby on the jukebox. A Christmas tree sat in the corner, its ornaments mismatched and tired, but still shining stubbornly against the fatigue of time. Caleb slid into a booth in the back, settling Emily and Luna beside him. He caught the wary glances of a waitress, then quickly ordered hot cocoa, soup, and warm milk. Emily clutched the mug with both hands when it arrived, her small fingers trembling against the ceramic. She sipped cautiously, eyes flickering between the baby on her lap and the man across from her. Caleb watched in silence, his dress shirt wrinkled now, his hair damp with melted snow. For years, he had measured success in numbers, deals, and accolades, but here he was, transfixed by the sight of a child savoring cocoa as though it were the rarest treasure. The name Samantha echoed suddenly in his mind, unbidden and relentless. He leaned forward slightly, his voice soft. "Emily, can you tell me what happened? How you ended up out there tonight?" She stared down into her cup for a long moment. her lips pressed tightly together. When
Just
she
try to listen
finally
to your heart,
spoke,
and it
her
will tell you
voice
what
was
you need.
small but steady. She told him about her mother, about how she had gotten sick and faded slowly until one morning she did
cold
not wake
night.
up. She spoke of Miguel, her stepfather, who had once made them pancakes shaped like stars before an accident stole him away. And then she spoke of Carol, her aunt, who had promised care but delivered cruelty. Caleb listened, each word striking like a blow.
strength faded
Rage
like the
coiled
colors
beneath
in a
his
forgotten
skin,
picture.
but he forced himself to
soft
remain
memory.
calm for the sake of the child before him. When Emily mentioned how Carol locked them in the basement, how she called Luna it instead of her name, his fists curled against the tabletop until his knuckles ached. Then Emily reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small tarnished locket. The chain was frayed, the clasp worn from years of use. She opened it,
Are you
revealing
listening to
two
me?
photographs. One of a young woman with a smile that could light entire rooms, and one of himself, barely 25, arm draped casually around her shoulder. Samantha, the air seemed to leave his lungs all at once. He stared at the locket, at the piece of the past he had thought long gone, now clutched in the hands of a child who looked too much like her to be coincidence. She said this was from before, Emily whispered. Before Miguel. Before me. She said she used to love you. Caleb's throat tightened. Memories surged sunlit afternoons. Laughter tangled with music. A love so reckless and consuming that it had frightened them both. And now, sitting across from him, was the living proof that it had never truly ended. She kept that all these years, he murmured. Emily nodded. Sometimes she told us stories about a man who built big cities but forgot how to love people. She said that is what broke her heart. The words pierced deeper than he could bear. He leaned back, staring through the frosted glass of the diner window, watching the snow fall heavier outside. For so long he had chased success, thinking it might fill the void she left. But here was her daughter, flesh and blood, carrying the truth of everything he had run from. Emily spoke again, her voice quieter this time, almost fragile. She told me once, if anything happened, to find you. She said you would know what to do. Caleb's heart twisted until he thought it might break. He had not been there when Samantha needed him. He had not known about Emily, about Luna, about the suffering that had shaped them. But now, fate had dragged them into his life with no warning, and he would not turn away. His phone buzzed in his pocket, reminding him of meetings, investors, and obligations. He pulled it out, stared at the glowing screen, then, without hesitation, pressed a number. "Cancel everything for the next 3 days," he said flatly. "There is a personal emergency." When the call ended, he turned his phone face down on the table and reached across to Emily with an open hand. "I do not know what comes next," he said, his voice trembling with an honesty he had not spoken in years. "But I will not let anyone hurt you again." For a long moment she studied him, the weight of a child's judgment heavy in the silence. Then, slowly, she placed her small hand in his, her shoulders easing just slightly. Caleb felt the shift within him, something thawing for the first time in years. Outside, the snow continued to fall, relentless and cold. But inside that booth, surrounded by chipped mugs and the faint hum of old carols, a new story had quietly begun. The hospital doors slid open with a hiss, releasing a burst of warm air that fogged Caleb's glasses and sent a shiver of relief down his spine. He stepped inside, holding Emily's hand tightly in one palm and cradling Luna against his chest with the other.
Some help here, please?
Snow clung to his shoes, melting into dark spots on the sterile floor, but he did not care how out of place he looked in his tailored suit. All that mattered was the fragile weight he carried. The emergency ward was a storm of sound and movement nurses calling out instructions, machines beeping, a toddler wailing somewhere down the hall. Yet, for Caleb, the noise fell away. His focus narrowed to the baby whose small breaths warmed the crook of his arm, and the little girl whose grip on his hand trembled like a frightened bird. A triage nurse glanced up and froze when she saw the bruises circling Luna's neck. Caleb did not wait to be asked. "She needs help," he said simply, his voice rough, commanding but laced with desperation. In an instant, they were ushered into a pediatric room, a team of nurses gathering around them like a shield. Emily clung to his sleeve, her eyes darting to every face with suspicion, but she did not let go. When a doctor entered, middle-aged, sharp-eyed, voice calm but gently, examined Luna with practiced care. He lifted her shirt to reveal more bruises scattered across her ribs. His expression darkened. "These are not fresh," he murmured, almost to himself. She has been hurt before. Caleb's jaw tightened. His pulse thundered in his ears. He could feel Emily stiffen beside him. She reached out, desperate to pull her sister back, whispering, "Please do not take her away." Caleb dropped to one knee, meeting her gaze at eye level. "They are helping her," he said softly, steadying his voice even as rage burned in his chest. "I promise, she is safe." Emily's lips pressed together, but she gave a small nod. She did not trust easily, yet for the moment, she was willing to believe him. Hours blurred into a rhythm of questions, forms, and signatures. A social worker named Mara entered, clipboard in hand, eyes sharp with skepticism. Caleb recognized the look. To her, he was a stranger in expensive clothes, claiming guardianship of children he could not possibly understand. But he answered every question steadily, his voice carrying a conviction that surprised even himself. When she asked if he was a relative, he hesitated only briefly before saying, "Yes, close enough." While adults traded paperwork, Emily sat by Luna's crib, her small body curled protectively around her sister, even as exhaustion tugged at her. She drew little stars on the corner of a napkin with a stub of a pencil, silent, eyes red but dry. Caleb watched her, his heart breaking at the strength she carried alone. Finally, the nurse returned with news that Luna was stable, hydrated, warmed, no internal bleeding, but they would keep her overnight for observation. When they brought her back into the room, dressed in soft pajamas patterned with ducks, Emily lit up for the first time since they had met. She leaned over the crib and whispered, "Hey, baby girl, I am still here." Caleb stood near the window, hands buried in his pockets, unsure where he fit in this fragile circle. Yet when Emily began to hum a lullaby, something shifted. The tune was off-key, unfamiliar yet strangely known. He strained to place it, and then it struck him it was the same melody he had once hummed years ago, lying beside Samantha on quiet winter mornings. She had laughed when he sang it poorly, teasing him, promising to teach him the right notes one day. Without realizing it, he joined in, his voice low, hesitant. Emily froze mid-hum, her head snapping toward him. "You know that song," she whispered. His throat tightened. "A long time ago," he admitted. "That is Mommy's song. She sang it every time Luna cried." The room seemed to shrink. Caleb sat down heavily, the weight of the past pressing against him with brutal force. He wanted to explain, to confess that Samantha had once been his world, that he had not known about Emily, that he had failed them both. But the words caught, stuck behind years of regret. Instead, Emily filled the silence. "Mom said your name once, when Luna was born. She told me if anything ever happened to find you, that you would know what to do." Caleb's vision blurred, his chest tightening with grief he had kept buried for too long. Samantha had remembered him, even at the end,
The infant is
even when
stable.
he had convinced himself she had forgotten. Later, Mara returned with papers. "Your emergency guardianship is provisionally approved," she said crisply. "Temporary, pending a
placement form
formal
is for
hearing.
emergency
For
guardianship.
now, they are yours." The words struck him harder than any business deal ever had. His. They were his responsibility now, not as a transaction, not as a burden,
grant you
but as a
provisional approval,
truth that
but it
wrapped
will
itself
require
around
a
his
hearing.
heart with unshakable finality. Emily turned to him, her hazel eyes glistening. "Does that mean we are not going back?" "No," he said
We'll need to keep you for
firmly, his
observation a
voice
little
steady
longer,
despite
but you
the
should
storm
discharge
inside
this
him.
afternoon.
"You
Oh,
are
good.
not
Will
going
I get some
back."
paperwork then?
Something in her face softened then, something fragile and pure. She leaned her small head against his arm, trusting him fully for the first time. The weight of it nearly undid him. That night, as he sat in the dim hospital room, watching the two sisters breathe softly in sleep, Caleb realized he was no longer the man who had walked into the snow
you all for
hours
your hard
earlier.
work.
He was not the
was our
millionaire
pleasure.
defined by skyscrapers and silent penthouses. He was something else now, something unsteady, but real. For the first time in years, he was not completely alone. Morning crept into the hospital room, in shades of pale gray and rose, the kind of dawn that arrived hesitantly after a night of snow. Caleb sat upright in the chair by the window, his jacket draped over his lap, his eyes red from fatigue. Emily was curled against him, her tiny frame pressed into his side, while Luna slept soundly in the crib a few feet away. The rhythmic beeping of the monitor was steady, reassuring, a lull that carried with it the fragile comfort of survival. When the doctor returned
Here
with
we are,
discharge
darling.
papers,
Welcome to
Caleb
our
signed them with
beautiful
hands
hotel.
that trembled not from doubt, but from the weight of responsibility settling deeper into his bones. Within hours, they left the sterile brightness of the hospital behind, stepping out into the crisp December air.
We are all good
He
now.
bundled the girls into the warmth of his car and drove toward a boutique hotel, one of the few places he knew could offer immediate shelter. The suite he checked into was elegant, designed for executives and visiting dignitaries, with sleek furniture and polished chrome fixtures. It was immaculate, but sterile, a space that echoed his own life. Emily's wide eyes scanned the room, but instead of awe, there was confusion. To her, this was not home. It was just another place they had been carried into, another room that was not theirs. Caleb noticed the way she clutched Luna tighter, as if ready to flee again if this too turned unsafe. He felt a pang of guilt so sharp it nearly stole his breath. He brewed coffee, but the machine's hiss sounded too harsh in the silence. He realized then that he could not just place them in these pristine surroundings and expect them to heal. He needed to create something that felt alive, something that spoke of belonging. He left briefly, slipping out while the girls rested. The department store aisles stretched wide under fluorescent lights, and for the first time in years, Caleb felt completely out of place. He wandered past shelves stacked with plush animals, coloring books, bottles of baby formula, and pajamas patterned with stars and foxes. His tailored coat and polished shoes felt absurd here, among the quiet chaos of childhood. An older woman stocking shelves noticed him lingering. "You look lost," she said kindly. "I need things," he admitted, his voice rawer than he expected. "For a baby, and for a little girl." She gave a knowing smile and began to fill his cart. Formula, a soft fleece onesie, a stuffed bear, coloring books, a purple blanket embroidered with stars. Caleb followed silently, humbled by how much he did not know and how desperately he wanted to learn. When he returned, Emily's face softened for the first time. She touched the blanket reverently, pressing it against her cheek. She hugged the bear close, then placed it gently in Luna's arms. The baby cooed, nestling her face into the fur. The sound, small as it was, filled the room with a lightness Caleb had not heard before.
My dearest
He
love.
cleared his throat. "I did not know what kind you liked," he admitted. "This kind is good," Emily whispered. Later that evening, after dinner of boxed macaroni and cheesy an accident of burnt edges and uneven flavor, that Emily nonetheless declared the best meal she had ever had, they gathered around the table. Crayons rolled across the surface as Emily sketched a crooked house with a tall figure beside two children. Above them, she drew a heart with wings. At the bottom, in uneven letters, she wrote a single word. Us. Caleb picked up the drawing, his throat tightening. He folded it carefully, sliding it into his wallet beside his ID as if it were the most valuable document he had ever carried. That night, after Emily had fallen asleep beside her sister, Caleb retrieved an old lockbox he had not touched in years. The combination clicked slowly, and inside lay fragments of a life he had tried to forget. Faded photographs, a dried rose pressed into paper, and a letter sealed in an envelope yellowed with time. His hands trembled as he unfolded it. Samantha's handwriting spilled across the page. She had written of love she was too afraid to declare, of fears that kept her silent, of regret that she had not asked him to stay. She confessed that she had not left because she stopped loving him, but because she loved him too much and feared holding him back. Caleb pressed the letter to his chest, guilt pressing down like a stone. Samantha had carried the secret alone, and Emily had borne the cost of his absence. He could not undo the past, but he could decide the present. The next morning, Emily padded across the suite barefoot. Luna balanced awkwardly on her hip. She set the baby down and looked at Caleb with steady eyes. "Mom used to tell us stories about you," she said. She said once there was a man who built buildings that touched the clouds but could not figure out how to build a family. She said she loved you, but you did not know how to stay. Caleb's chest tightened. He wanted to explain, to tell her about the mistakes and the blindness of ambition, but he stopped himself. Instead, he said quietly, "I want to stay now." Emily tilted her head as though weighing the truth in his words. Then, without another word, she crawled onto the sofa, pulling Luna into her lap. She wrapped the star blanket around both of them and hummed softly until the baby drifted into sleep. Caleb sat across from them, his heart heavy but strangely lightened too. For years, he had thought himself untouchable, a man immune to the pulls of ordinary life. But watching Emily rock her sister with a tenderness learned too soon, he realized that what he had been running from was not weakness, it was love. He rose quietly, pulled his laptop from its case, and typed a message to his assistant. A leave of absence, effective immediately. All responsibilities transferred to the CFO. No return date specified. When he closed the laptop, the silence that followed was not empty. It was full of crayons scattered across the floor, of a baby's soft breathing, of a child's faith beginning to flicker to life. For the first time, Caleb felt the stirrings of something he had thought long dead, hope. The courthouse loomed beneath a slate-gray sky, its stone columns dusted with snow. Inside, the air felt heavy, thick with the tension of lives about to be decided. Caleb sat at a long oak table, his hands clasped tightly together. Across the room, Carol Reyes sat rigid beside her attorney, her mouth drawn into a tight line. Her eyes held no warmth, no grief for the children she claimed as her own blood. Instead, they gleamed with something colder, like possession, as though the girls were not souls to be cherished, but burdens to be controlled. The judge entered, a woman with steel gray hair and lines carved deep from years of hearing stories both tragic and hopeful. The gavel struck once, echoing through the chamber. Arguments began swiftly. Carol's lawyer spoke with force, painting Caleb as an interloper, a wealthy man trying to play savior with no legal claim to the children. He emphasized blood ties, scoffing at the sudden appearance of a man who had been absent from Samantha's life for years. Caleb sat still, letting the storm wash over him. He did not flinch when the lawyer accused him of manipulation, of using his wealth to lure Emily into false security. He let them dig their hole deeper with every word. When his attorney rose, the tone shifted. Calm, deliberate, he presented evidence of neglect and abuse. Medical records documenting bruises both fresh and old, statements from doctors and social workers, testimony from Child Protective Services. He laid out the truth with precision, building a case that cut through Carol's facade. The judge listened, her gaze sharp. Then she turned to Caleb. "Mr. Whitmore, would you like to speak on your own behalf?" He rose slowly. His throat felt dry, but his voice carried steady. "I did not know about Emily until the night I found her," he began. "But when I looked into her eyes, I recognized someone I had once loved more than anything. Samantha and I were young, and I made mistakes. But I am here now. I am not leaving again."
I will stay.
He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. "I know I am not related to Luna by blood, but love does not always follow bloodlines. That baby girl clings to her sister like she is all she has. And Emily, she calls her whole world. I am not asking for temporary guardianship. I am asking to be their father." A hush fell over the room. Then, to everyone's surprise, the back door creaked open. A court liaison entered, guiding Emily forward. Her small shoes tapped against the polished floor, each step echoing louder than any argument made before. She walked straight to the front, lifting her chin to face the judge. "Can I say something?" she asked softly. The judge studied her, then nodded. "Go ahead." Emily turned, her gaze sweeping across the sea of adults before landing firmly on Caleb. Her voice wavered at first, but then grew steady. "Miss Carol says she is family, but she yelled a lot. She made Luna cry every day. She told me to stop asking about mommy. She said I was too loud and too much." Emily's small chest rose as she took a shaky breath. "But Mr. Caleb, he listens. He buys us blankets and lets us fall asleep on the couch. He reads all the bedtime stories, even the boring ones. And he sings, even if he is not very good." A ripple of laughter moved through the courtroom, soft but real. Emily's eyes glistened. "He does not hit us. He does not leave. That is what a dad does, right?" The judge leaned forward. "Do you feel safe with Mr. Whitmore?" Emily nodded firmly. "I feel like I can breathe." The silence that followed was louder than any word spoken before. Carol shot up from her chair, fury spilling across her face. "She is manipulating her. You are all being played." The judge slammed her gavel. "That is enough, Miss Reyes." After a long pause, the judge sighed, scanning the paperwork once more. "In light of the evidence presented, the testimony heard, and the best interests of the children, I hereby grant full guardianship of both Emily and Luna to Mr. Caleb Whitmore." The gavel struck again. Final, irrevocable. Caleb exhaled, his body trembling with the release of a tension he had carried too long. Outside, the snow fell in lazy spirals as he knelt beside Emily. Luna was bundled in his arms, her tiny face pressed against his chest. Emily threw her arms around his neck, her voice muffled against his shoulder. Does this mean you are really ours now?" He pulled back slightly, cupping her cheek. "I was always yours. I just did not know it yet." Her eyes filled with tears, but this time they were not born of fear. They were born of something gentler, something she had not dared believe in until now: hope. That evening, Caleb brought them not to the penthouse that had once been his fortress of solitude, but to a house he had been quietly renovating by the lake. It was not large, not filled with marble or glass, but warm. Light streamed through windows onto wooden floors. Emily gasped when she ran through the hallways, discovering her new room painted sky blue, a star-shaped nightlight glowing softly on the bedside table. She pressed her face against the window, squealing at the swing hanging from the old oak tree outside. Caleb stood in the doorway, watching her joy spill into the space. He felt his chest swell, not with pride in what he owned, but with gratitude for what he had been given. In the kitchen, Luna babbled happily in her high chair, slapping her hands against the tray. Emily rushed to her side, holding up the stuffed bear he had bought. The baby giggled, burying her face into the soft fur. Caleb's throat tightened. This was not the life he had built from blueprints and contracts. This was something richer, more fragile, and infinitely more real. Later, as they sat together beneath the glow of the fireplace, Emily leaned against him, whispering, "You will still be here tomorrow, right?" He brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. "I will be here every tomorrow you want me." Her smile was small, but it was enough. In that moment, Caleb knew that no courtroom, no bloodline, no past mistake could ever take this away from them. Winter slowly loosened its grip on Madison. The lake, once a sheet of silver ice, began to shimmer with the first signs of thaw. Crocuses pushed their fragile heads through the soil, and robins hopped along the sidewalks, as though reminding the city that warmth always returns. Inside the lakeside cottage, mornings no longer began with silence. Instead, Caleb woke to the soft patter of small feet across the floorboards, to Emily humming off-key in the bathroom, and to Luna's bubbling laughter as she discovered the sound of her own voice. The house bore marks of a family growing within its walls. The fridge was covered in crayon drawing skies filled with stars, houses with crooked chimneys, stick figures holding hands. Some were chaotic bursts of color, others careful attempts at detail, but all carried the same words scrawled in Emily's uneven handwriting: us. Toys lay scattered across the floor, mismatched socks hid beneath couches, and the air carried the constant sound of life. For the first time in years, Caleb felt that he was not inhabiting a space, but living in it. On a Saturday morning, he stood on the porch watching Emily crouched in the garden. Her braids swung as she pressed a small wooden marker into the soil. Luna sat nearby, chubby hands full of dirt, squealing with triumph every time Caleb intercepted another fistful from reaching her mouth. Emily straightened, brushing soil from her palms. "We are planting sunflowers," she explained seriously. "This one is mine, that one is Luna's, and this one is for Mommy." The name lingered in the air, soft and heavy. Caleb crouched beside her, brushing hair gently from her cheek. "She always said sunflowers looked like they were smiling," he whispered. Emily nodded solemnly. "Do you think she would like this place?" He looked out over the lake, the swing swaying gently in the breeze, the windows glowing with the warmth of a home. "She would love it," he said, "especially the swing." That afternoon, Emily disappeared into her room. Caleb had learned not to worry too quickly. She often retreated to draw, her way of processing a world too large for words. When she emerged nearly an hour later, she held something behind her back. "I made something," she said shyly. She placed a framed drawing in his lap. It showed the three of them standing on a hill surrounded by tall sunflowers, hands joined, while above them, a woman with wings made of stars and a crown of yellow petals floated in the sky. Beneath it, in careful block letters, she had written, "You stayed." Caleb's throat tightened as he read the words. He turned the frame over, finding a note taped to the back in Emily's handwriting, "To Dad. Not because you had to, but because you chose to." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. Luna squealed with delight and squirmed between them, and the three of them collapsed into a laughing, tearful heap on the rug. For a man who once thought himself untouchable, the mess of crayons, giggles, and tangled limbs felt like the richest gift he had ever been given. That evening, they built a blanket fort in the living room. It was Caleb's idea, though he insisted otherwise when Emily teased him. The couch cushions became walls, pillows stacked into towers, quilts stretched across chairs to form a glowing ceiling. Emily strung up a strand of fairy lights, filling the inside with a golden glow. Luna crawled in first, clapping her hands, while Emily followed with her favorite pillow. Caleb ducked in last, barely fitting, laughing like he had not laughed in years. Inside the fort, they shared cocoa in paper cups and popcorn from a bowl far too big for 3 people. Emily read from a book she had written herself, complete with scribbled illustrations and dramatic voices. Halfway through, Luna curled against Caleb's side, her breathing soft and even. Emily leaned her head on his shoulder, her voice slowing as the sugar crash set in. "Hey, Dad," she murmured sleepily. "Yes, sweetheart?" "You did not just find us," she whispered. "You stayed." Caleb kissed the top of her head. "I did not save you, Emily. You saved me." She gave a small smile before sleep claimed her, her hand still tangled in his. Later, long after they had both drifted off, Caleb sat awake beneath the glow of the fairy lights. He thought of the hollow years he had spent alone, of the skyscrapers and deals that had seemed so important. He thought of Samantha, her laughter and her silences, and the letter she had left behind. And then he looked at the 2 girls asleep against him, the living proof that love had not abandoned him. It had only been waiting. Tomorrow, he knew, there would be new challenges, papers to finalize, an adoption for Luna, a custody battle that might resurface, the messy logistics of raising children. But in that moment, wrapped in warmth and innocence, he realized none of it frightened him anymore. For the first time, he was not afraid of the world outside the walls of his home. Tomorrow, he would call his lawyer. Next week, he would bring home a dog because Emily had been wishing for one. When the sunflowers bloomed, they would have a garden party, just the 3 of them, with laughter and cake and nothing else required. But tonight, he stayed exactly where he was. Not because he had to, but because there was nowhere else he would rather be. There are stories that reach into the deepest places of the heart. Stories that remind us that love is not measured in wealth, status, or even blood, but in the choice to stay, to protect, and to heal. Caleb Whitmore's journey began in silence, in the cold shadow of a life built on towers of glass and steel. But it did not end there. One snowy Christmas Eve, a trembling voice pierced through the emptiness, and with it came 2 small hands that redefined everything he thought he knew about family. Emily and Luna were not part of his plans. They were not written into the contracts or scheduled in his calendar. They arrived in his life like a storm and like a miracle. In their eyes, he saw both unbearable loss and unbreakable resilience. In their laughter, he rediscovered a sound he had forgotten. In their trust, fragile but growing, he found the courage to lay aside everything else and begin again. This story is not just about a lonely millionaire or 2 children who needed rescue. It is about second chances, about the power of love to thaw even the coldest winters. It is about how healing does not erase the scars, but transforms them into reminders of strength. It is about how family is not always defined by blood, but by the decision to open your heart and never walk away. For Emily, it meant believing that someone would finally stay. For Luna, it meant being held with tenderness instead of fear. For Caleb, it meant becoming more than a provider or a protector. It meant becoming a father in the truest sense, who listens, who shows up, who stays, even when it is difficult. Perhaps you see yourself in Caleb's loneliness, or in Emily's courage, or in Luna's quiet hope. Perhaps you know what it feels like to long for someone to choose you. Or perhaps you have been the one to take that first uncertain step toward love. These stories remind us that even in the darkest nights, there are lights waiting to be lit, lives waiting to be changed, families waiting to be formed. And that is why we tell them. Because somewhere out there, another heart is waiting to be reminded that healing is possible, that kindness matters, that staying is sometimes the bravest thing you can do. If this story touched you, if it reminded you of the beauty hidden in broken places, we invite you to join us. Subscribe to Loss and Healing, where every story is a testament to resilience, to compassion, and to the enduring power of love. Stay with us, because the next story may be the one your heart has been waiting for.